Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the Oraculos True Divination podcast, where I bring you ancient wisdom for the modern mystic. I'm your host, Mychal A. Bryan, and joining me today is Traditional Astrologer Extraordinaire, Sharon Knight. Sharon, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you, Mychal, for inviting me on. I mean, I'm following such a host of luminaries. I'm awed and honoured.
Well, I am both awed and honored to have you here on the show today, Sharon, because I have been learning a little bit about the work that you do, and I am super excited to dive in with you because you and I share very similar lineages in terms of our astrological background, and we also share very similar interests. So I'm super excited to dig in with you, and I'm sure that our listeners as well can't wait.
I hope so.
Well, yeah, it'll be fine. Now, for those of you out there who are new to the Oraculos True Divination podcast, this is a platform where I try to bring you, dear listeners, wonderful interviews with wonderful astrologers from around the world who represent some of the best within our field. So if you do want to stick around and be a part of the momentum that we're building here on the True Divination podcast, please feel free to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel, as well as share the content, because what the world needs right now is more great quality content and interviews from more great astrologers. So please do take a moment to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel so that you can stay in the loop with all the wonderful things that are going on in the world of astrology. Now, Sharon, you have been active in the past, I dare say, 3 decades in the field of astrology. You have been associated with the Faculty of Astrological Studies in the UK, as well as you've been connected with Olivia Barclay and her School of Astrology for many, many years. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about your background in astrology and how it is you came to be a practicing traditional astrologer today?
Well, basically, I think like a lot of people, I started off with sun sign astrology. When I was about 16, I was given a copy of Linda Goodman's Sun Signs, and I memorized that book.
Wow.
And, you know, when you're sort of 18, 19, and you're going out to the bars and things, and I'd look at people, men, I didn't waste it on women, and I'd say, gosh, you must be a Sagittarius. Well, you must be a Pisces. And they go, wow, have a drink, tell me more. So for many years, I thought that's what astrology was. And then through my weird and wonderful work career, I met an Italian woman. And she said to me, she was sort of a medium or a psychic. And I was working in this was a time in the 80s when there was a lot of Middle Eastern conflict, and I was working for a very well-known Middle Eastern potentate. So security was exceedingly high. Anyway, this Italian came to the house, so she knew who I worked for, but she said to me, you have got the gift to be an astrologist. So I said, well, yeah, I know astrology. And she said, no, you don't. And she went away and did my chart. Because fortunately, my mother knew, my mother's always been a stickler about my birth time. And she came back and she said, you should study astrology properly. So without further ado, I went to adult evening classes, which they ran in London for pennies in those days. And that's where I met Jon Frawley for the first time. And I studied with 2 brilliant, I mean, I was so lucky. Mike Edwards, who sadly slipped off his mortal coil, and another brilliant astrologer who's still around and a great friend is Bernard Eccles. And also, I then found out about the Faculty of Astrology. So I joined the faculty and I got my certificate, easy peasy. I got my intermediate diploma, not so easy. And then I was just coming up for the diploma finals. And because I've been taught by Mike Edwards, who followed Lily and Bernati, I made a prediction. And I described somebody. And I got my papers sent back from my tutor, crossed through with a big red mark. You do not make predictions.
Wow.
And I thought, well, what is the point of astrology if you don't predict? I mean, we can use semantics here and say prediction, forecast,
Right.
Trends.
Right.
But, what's the point? What is the point of astrology? It was used in the past to work out, weather. If you're going to go to war, you'd only go to war in the summer or the spring. And I think you're just about to get bottom bombed by a cat.
That's completely fine. We love cats on the Truth of Nation podcast.
Yeah, off you go, boy. Go on. And I thought, I'm not going to continue with astrology. What's the point? And I was chatting with a wonderful gentleman, and he said, Sharon, my dear, what you need is Olivia. And he gave me her number. I drove down to where she lived in Deal 2 days later, signed up and started. And I was extremely lucky that I used to go and stay with Olivia quite a lot. And fortunately I gained my QHP. So from the QHP, you've got that amazing woman, a walking, computer, Lee Lehman.
Yes.
She did the QHP. Deb Holding, of course, is well known. Barbara Dunn, who inherited the QHP. Barbara's not so well known. She's been a jobbing astrologer, and of course, Jon Frawley. I mean, Jon is just amazing.
Yes.
Just amazing.
Yes.
So that really was how I came into the QHP. And Olivia, because I was a tutor on the course, this is back in the very early 90s, and Olivia said to me, there's this thing just started up in America called Project Hindsight. If you want to remain as a tutor, you must subscribe to it. And I bless her soul every single day for that. And
Wow.
So, of course, I used to get these, what is this? This is Valence. I've been reading. I used to get these through the post, and then the Latin ones, the brown ones, Bernati. And then I was fortunate enough to meet Rob Zoller when he came over to the UK. And I fell in love with Rob, not exactly, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
and I did his course, but I have to say the course that he had in 1996, when I studied with him, 96 and 97, is vastly different to the course of the 2000s. And Rob Zoller produced, to my mind, some of the very best traditional all-round astrologers. So he produced Ben, of course, Ben Dykes. Brilliant, wonderful Ben Dykes.
Most definitely. And I'm looking at your table in the background. I can't help myself when I see several of Ben's translations there.
Oh yeah, I'm working on some papers at the moment, so they're vital.
Right.
I mean, well, I've got. Can you see this brown cabinet behind me?
Yes,
the side of it?
yes.
That is full of Ben's books and publications.
Wow.
And let's not forget. I mean, I know he didn't come out of Rob Zoller's school. He came out of Rob Schmidt's school.
Chris Brennan.
And Stephen Burchfield, Onadosha, Stephen Burchfield, and Ben Dykes, I think, were Rob Zoller's legacy to the world of astrology. Those three men are truly stupendous when it comes to traditional natal and mundane astrology, and I just sit at their knees. I'm very lucky that I can have access to their knowledge, and I learn from those three in particular. So that's really how I came into gradually dropping all the modern concepts of astrology. You see, we have to remember, going back, we didn't have access to the traditional material, and the volume of astrology books that came out in the 60s were primarily on the outer planets, and they were very psychological, and everything's going to be wonderful, and if you want to be this, you can be that.
Right.
Sort of
Right.
not really that
Yeah.
helpful.
Right. And I think, Sharon, what a major contribution from traditional astrology has been in terms of the 21st century is it's added a more richly textured vision of astrology for the modern practicing astrologer. So it's no longer completely based on this concept of unbounded positivity, but it's based on this concept of the realities of life. And life has all of our joys and all of our sorrows. It has all of our triumphs and all of our downfalls. And our astrology, as being reflective of our human experience, should also participate in this rich and nuanced dialogue about life in general.
Well, this is great. You see, 20 years ago, there was a huge schism between traditional astrology and modern astrology. And in the UK at that time, I was unusual in the fact that I wasn't just a horary astrologer. If I'd been a horary astrologer, that would have been much easier. I would have fitted into a certain group. But being a more natal astrologer and a mundane, I didn't find it easy to fit in
Any particular circle?
With any particular circle, yeah. So I for many, this is why I love Facebook so much, because for so many years I worked alone, and then I discovered Facebook 10 years ago, and then I discovered that there were creatures like myself who who sought not to keep this divide, but to try and bring the aspects of modern and traditional together. And people say to me, oh, you don't use the outer planets, you're weird. But they forget that my background and my training was on Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. That, there was nothing else. In the 80s, there was nothing else apart from those three planets.
Wow.
And so I absorbed all that. Right. I know all that stuff.
Right.
And even with mundane, people say, oh, you don't use Neptune and Pluto and Uranus. Well, I consider them because they are hugely generational cycles. No two ways about that. But what I have a problem with, and will always have a problem with, is when I'm in a group of astrologers, professional astrologers, people who've been doing it as long as I have, and they're going, well, look what Pluto's doing to my Uranus. And you think, sorry? Pluto is doing exactly the same thing to everyone's Uranus. Ah, yes, but you see, Uranus is in my second house.
Oy vey.
So I still have, I've learned now, just let it go. If that's how they want to be,
right,
fine.
Right. I think this brings up a very interesting topic, and it's something that Jon Frawley and I, bless his heart, spoke about 2 weeks ago on the podcast, where I asked him the question as to why he feels so many traditional astrologers avoid using Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto within their work. And his response was that, well, perhaps it's a response to the overuse of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto that was going on back in the 80s. And do you feel as if that's also the case, or does that stand true for you, that you've seen them so overused that you were wanting to get back to a cleaner, simpler astrology?
Very possibly, yes. Yes, I do. But again, I think because I got so fed up of when I was going to astrological do's and people saying to me, well, you're traditional astrology, you don't know anything about the outer planets. Well, yes, actually I do. But yes, I think it is the over-reliance and the neglect. It's the neglect of the whole of the chart. If the modern astrologers would actually know a little bit more about the traditional philosophy. You see, I think this again is something to me that is lost in the modern astrology. It's the historical philosophy behind the use of astrology. Take, for instance, the parts, a lot of
Right.
fortune, a lot of diamond. Most people they know what the glyph you've got the part of fortune in the chart, and a lot of people leave it there, but they don't know what to do with it. And if they have some idea, then they use it, but they say, oh, that doesn't work. But when you know the philosophy that Fortuna relates to the moon, diamond to the sun, and these 2 points are mirror points of one another, and then you learn how to cast the charts from those parts, and with zodiacal releasing, which dear Chris Brennan has brought to the fore. So many people now are using zodiacal releasing from the part of spirit, but they still don't understand the philosophy behind the parts. So there is some historical philosophical knowledge that I think would be of benefit to modern astrology. And then perhaps they wouldn't be so reliant on the outers.
When it comes to the philosophical underpinnings of our classical astrology, I too feel that if more astrologers were aware of how we came to consider Mars to be this warrior planet, or how we came to consider Saturn as being this cold, distant fart in the sky, and if we had a relationship to the philosophical underpinning that Saturn being most distant from the luminaries and most distant from the moisture-giving vapors of the Earth is therefore cold and dry, being the furthest removed, and blah blah blah. If we understood this philosophy that underpins our astrology, it would really give us a richer experience of that same astrology, and we wouldn't need to bring in every single thing that's floating in the sky in order to give us a nuanced understanding of our charts. And I mean, there's so much that is being done today, and you mentioned several authors, Benjamin Dykes, Chris Brennan, who have really done pioneering work to bring back so much of what was at risk of being lost. And I do feel that there is more of a marriage going on between modern astrology as well as classical astrology today, because Chris Brennan has done such an amazing job with the astrology podcast that people are now wanting to tune in and wanting to test these methods within their own astrology because it's so much more available. So do you, Sharon, think that there has been more of a union between these two sides of astrology, or do you still feel as if there is more work to be done in terms of the education of the modern astrologer in our classical methods?
I was at the Astrological Association conference last year where Chris was one of the keynote speakers, and he was brilliant, and he unified the whole audience because he spoke about Uranus. And I think people were surprised that somebody who has produced such a fantastic tome as Hellenistic astrology was able to talk coherently about modern planets. And certainly, as you say, with Chris's podcast, bringing in modern astrologers, he is doing a lot to bring things together. But I can only speak from the English schools that I know, and the faculty of astrology, which is the main school and the oldest school in existence in the Western world, they are now embracing traditional astrology. For instance, they've got Wade Caves as their traditional tutor, which is fantastic because Wade is obviously associated with Deb Holding with the STA, and he qualified with Wendy Stacey. So Wade has a foot in both camps. Wade is young and Wade is very good looking. So he hopefully will bring in the younger people, and hopefully with the hats on of being a relative newcomer to astrology, because let's face it, I think he said he's only been doing astrology something like 8 or 10 years, and suddenly, you know, he's been pushed to the peak as being the go-to guy for traditional astrology. And I think it's, you know, I'm really hopeful that he is going to bring in younger people, and he, like Chris, will help heal the gulf. But I still feel that the modern astrology schools do need to bring in a little bit of the historical philosophy behind astrology. It would help. It would help everyone. But I guess I live in dreamland.
well, Sharon, there is also a tremendous amount of work that you're doing insofar as elevating the standard of astrology through both education and certification. And one of the hats that you wear is that you are the chair of the Association of Professional Astrologers International. Can you tell us about what the function of the APAI is, and how do you feel this is helping us create a world of better astrology?
Well, the APAI was set up in the 1990s, and it was primarily to try and protect astrology, because at that time in the EU there was a lot of anti-astrology feeling by both the church and, you know, various other people who don't understand astrology. So a group of astrologers got together and set the association up, and there was a code of ethics you had to adhere to, just like for a doctor or lawyer or whatever, and you had to qualify. You had to have shown that you have studied with a recognized school and obtained not a certificate but a diploma. So in other words, you've probably put in 5 years hard graft and money to study the craft. And all the schools that we have on our books, I think we've probably got about 20 schools, mine is one of them, where in order to become a member of the APAI, you have to have got a diploma from a school, which itself will have its own code of ethics, and you then have to sign up to the APAI code of ethics. And we then try and promote in the media that there are actually people out there who have studied, who take this seriously as a profession, and that we will not betray confidences. We will not do, as a lot of people go, it's remarkable, people go online and they find this astrologer offering readings for free. Well, we all know there's no such thing as a free lunch. And then some months later, I get emails, can you help me? This astrologer is frightening me. They're demanding money.
Wow.
Because there's something terrible going to happen in my life. When you go and look at these websites of these pretend astrologers, these charlatans,
Right.
what do they have? They say they're a member of the APAI, so it shows we're out there, we're the kite mark, and then they will have qualifications from, say, the Mayo or the faculty. And I know darn well these people don't exist. So, but the public find us when there's a problem. And it's a shame they don't find us beforehand and actually look on the register of accepted astrologers. So the APAI is different to something such as OPA or ISAR because we rely on the schools and their educational format to produce good astrologers, whereas for ISAR and OPA you have to go through their process,
Right.
and before you can be accredited to them or with them or by them.
Right.
So the APAI is much more inclusive. We figure if you studied with one school on our list, you've got the diploma, and we have to have sight of the diploma before you can be accepted, then there's no need for you to undertake further examinations by people who perhaps are from a different astrological background. You know, like for me, I couldn't be certified because I just do straightforward traditional astrology, and there's no straightforward traditional astrology body as such.
Right.
So that's really the aim of the API, is to bring good astrologers to the public, to the media, and to give those studying astrology a goal to aim for, and recognition that astrology is a serious profession. Just look at India. You know, it's protected. It's a protected profession.
Mm-hmm. Sharon, thank you so much for sharing that information about the APAI with us. And it's amazing work that you're doing, because we definitely do need more standard bearers for astrology, and organizations like the APAI are maintaining those standards and really creating a path for all astrologers to become not only better at our craft, but also recognized beneath the banner of one unified body. So definitely kudos to you all at the APAI.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, can you give us the contact information for the APAI for astrologers who are probably certified or who want to go down the path of becoming recognized by your organization?
Yes, it's a very long website name. It's Association Professional Astrologers International.co.uk, but you can also type in apai.co.uk, and that should take you to the site. And of course, if anyone watching this has any problems, contact me and I'll send you the link.
Yeah. Great. Now, Sharon, you just mentioned that you probably wouldn't be able to get a certification that recognizes you as a traditional astrologer, but I do know that you offer certification in traditional astrology specifically. So, can you tell us about the certification program that you offer?
Yeah, well, my course is about a 2-year-long course, and it does require people to have at least a basic knowledge of astrology, certainly of the 7 planets, not of all the asteroids and everything else. And the first part, or the certificate part, is in 5 sections, but there's probably 5 lessons per section, and we go through the houses, the planets, sort of all the usual stuff that one goes through, with a little bit of the philosophy thrown in through each lesson or each section. And then the final part is actually on predictive astrology. So the first part is on delineation of a chart from a traditional perspective. And as you know, with traditional astrology, it's very simple, 7 planets. But as you peel back the layers of the onion, it gets deeper and deeper and deeper. So so that's why it's about a 2-year course. It's the same for the QHP course, because we also offer a diploma course naturally on the QHP. So I just teach the certificate part of the course, which is the basic astrology, and then we have Petros in Greece, who is our main tutor, and of course Barbara. So there's myself, Tanya, and Tanya's in Italy, but she does the German and Italian students. Petros does the Greek certificate students as well as the diploma students. So so both courses are approximately 2 years to complete to get the diploma qualification.
Great. And where can people find out more information about your course that you offer and also the QHP program?
So my course is found on my website under Learning Astrology, and my website is astrologersharon.co.uk, and that's Astrologer Sharon is email, Facebook, you name it. The QHP is actually under qhp.co.uk.
Great.
So they are easy to find.
Awesome. And I'm going to put that information down in the description box below for all of you who do want to look further into studying directly with Sharon, as well as looking into the qualifying Horary Practitioners program, which is the program that was created by Olivia Barkley. And I know a few people who passed through that program, and one or two of them have been mentors of mine. I've been mentored by Lee Lehman in her own Horary program directly as her apprentice. And so I know that you guys create and send into the world A-class astrologers. So I'm really excited for our listeners to go over and check out the wonderful work that you're doing there as well.
Thank you.
Now, Sharon, moving into the meat and potatoes of today, are you a vegetarian?
No.
Okay, great.
Okay. You think I'd be this fat if I were vegetarian?
Oh, Lord, you're not fat. Anywho, so moving into the meat and potatoes of today, I would really like to talk to you about the work that you've done in traditional predictive astrology, because that seems to be the number one piece for you. So talk to us a bit, Sharon, about your practice with traditional predictive astrology. What does that look like for you?
Okay, well, that incorporates Horary, of course, because Horary was the foundation stone of all astrology. So you had to learn Horary, then you learned electional, then you learned
natal.
I think it was natal, then it was
mundane.
Yeah. So it really was the building block. And my Horary journey, which of course was what I did for the first few years of my practice, was fantastic, and it led me to some interesting countries, and I use it with my clients today. So although predominantly my work is natal, there is always an element of a question in the chart. So when a client comes to me, I give them the option of either having a full detailed natal and year ahead analysis, or having a detailed natal analysis year ahead plus a horary, because unfortunately I'm not retained by a global leader, and to do
neither am I. So
yeah, I'm just a jobbing astrologer, and my natal chart is never going to be, I'm never going to be famous, therefore I'm never going to be employed by, say, Donald Trump or Boris. So my work is the ordinary man, and I'm an ordinary woman. And I love it. I just really love it. I love the awareness that even if you just keep it down to sort of the basic humoral traits or temperaments, and sort of just slightly digressing here, Jung studied astrology, as we all know, and it was only after Jung that we got the modern astrology. He studied what was around in the traditional astrology, and of course his 4 archetypes relate to the 4 humours.
Right.
And something called the Myers-Briggs personality test, what does it devolve back to? The 4 humours. Hey, and get this, I love this. I'm a good Catholic. Well, I'm not actually, because I'm an astrologer, so I'm not a good Catholic. But there's a website called CatholicMatch.com. What does it have on it?
Choleric, sanguine, phlegmatic, and melancholic.
Don't you just love it?
Yes.
I mean, it's fantastic. Absolutely fantastic.
And
yet
no,
you say.
I found when I was initially, like, way back in the day, and I'm saying way back in the day as if I'm that old, and I'm not, but I found in researching the 4 humors, I got all of these hits to go to these Catholic websites and these papers that were written by these Catholic priests and everything on the 4 humors. And it was so both heartening as well as humorous to me to find these long discussions of what it means to be choleric and who in the Bible was choleric and who was sanguine, and this person was phlegmatic and that's why they did this, and this person was melancholic and that's why they did that. And it was just so interesting to find that this language, which is really rooted within our classical, the most classical of astrology has made its way into Christianity. Because if we look back in the Tetrabiblos, Ptolemy is essentially saying that the nature of Saturn being cold and dry and intemperately cold therefore makes him melancholic, and the nature of Mars being intemperately hot and dry makes him choleric. And this goes back to Ptolemy. This is astrology, but it's grafted itself, as so much of our ancient wisdom does, onto things that society now finds acceptable.
It is interesting, isn't it, how it's changed. I mean, I was actually told I had to renounce astrology or Catholicism. Like a good girl, I went to confession Christmas Eve, and it was a trainee priest. And
you did not confess astrology, Sharon.
Well, the thing I did, because my priest knew I was an astrologer, and he'd come to my house. And incidentally, sad person that I am, my last house that I lived in for over 20 years, the reason I bought it was because it was in the village, Isfield, where Nicholas Culpeper, the 17th century herbalist, grew up. That's how sad I am. So anyway, this trainee priest, so I went in, and he said, now, I like to do things by the book. And have you read your horoscopes or had anything to do with the occult? So I laughed. I said, but I write the horoscopes. I said, I do a weekly radio show on the horoscopes. And because I thought he'd been set up by Father Richard, you see, and he hadn't. Oh, he literally wanted to throw the Bible at me and told me to get out. So, yes. So there you go. That's my story.
But like you said, we go on these Catholic match websites today, and they're matching you based on your temperament. So you had to have been doing something right.
Exactly. So you see, again, this is, and I think a lot of modern astrologers don't actually appreciate the use of the humours, and they know Jung's 4 archetypes, but I wonder how many of them are aware that Jung's archetypes do actually relate back to the humours.
Right.
And I think that's a very good area for people to study, especially when it comes to health and well-being. It can make a very big difference to how people would approach perhaps recreational drugs, And this is fresh in my mind because I just had a client who has health issues. Obviously, I'm not a doctor, and I do not
Right.
make it. I don't go there because I'm not a doctor.
Right.
I recommend them to a doctor, to a good doctor. I'm a herbalist, but I'm not a nimmy herbalist like Marcus Patchett. You've got to have him on your show. That man is a genius.
What's his name?
Marcus Patchett.
Okay.
He is amazing. Anyway, he's a herbalist. He's a NIMI. He's the National Institute of Herbal Medicine, which is a 5-year full medical course. I could never afford it because it was, I think, going back, it was £30,000 and 5 years. So I just got another herbal qualification.
Right.
So anyway, this person asked me about supplements and things, and I said, "What are you taking?" And I looked at his chart, and his Jupiter, which Jupiter relates to the liver and lungs, and his Jupiter was very cold and wet. So for his temperament, which I won't go into, he actually needed warming foods and things that would warm him up. And what was he overdosing on? That's the only way I can put it. On cannabis. Well, cannabis is hemp, and it's a herb of Saturn. It's cold and dry, and he needed warm and moisture. So his overindulgence on the wrong type of supplement, let's call it that, was damaging him further.
Right.
So again, for a lot of people, just having an understanding of the attributes of the herbs or weeds, as a lot of people here in England call them, but how they can be so beneficial to your health. And especially with this lockdown, now the air's cleaner, you can go and pick your nettles and your herbs from the roadside because there's no cars and they're not so polluted.
Right. Sharon, I think it's really interesting, this point that you're making, because as we look back through the Renaissance literature, as we look in Lilly and Culpeper and Mansforth and Blagrave and Coley and all of these Renaissance astrologers, we see that they all, in listing the attributes of the planets, they all also list the gems associated with those planets, the herbs associated with those planets, the animals associated with those planets, the illnesses, as well as things that you can do to balance your relationship to those planets. And this is something that we've also lost within our modern astrology to a large degree, because we don't get this when we study Saturn. We get the fact that Saturn is conservative and it likes to follow the rules, and it sometimes is depressed. And so we get all of this descriptive psychological piece about Saturn, which is also in the Renaissance material. People have the tendency of thinking that this concept of the human nature just became something that astrology started to look at after the psychological revolution in astrology. But if you go back, even in Abraham ibn Ezra, even if you go back further than that to Masha'Allah, you hear them describing the quality and the nature and essentially the soul of the native based on the different planets that have rulership in the nativity. So saying all this to say that the traditional astrological approach has such a rich context for what herb to use, what color to use, what gem to use, that it's really something worth reclaiming.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is where Vedic astrology or Jyotish, whatever the term is that people use, it recognizes the use of color, of gems, and obviously herbs. And another thing that we've forgotten is the power of sound, and certain sounds are associated with the planets. And on NASA's website, you can listen to the noise the planets make.
Wow.
There's so much that, I mean, there's only so many hours in a day we can all study and listen to YouTube and things. I do recognize that, but the the traditional background brings so much to our modern life. I do feel that, as I say, if only more modern astrologers could incorporate some of the traditional background into their work, they would perhaps be able to help their clients a little bit more. But then astrologers get the clients that need them.
This is true.
So modern astrology, people think I have a downer on modern astrology, I poo-poo it. I don't at all. As I say, my background was modern astrology, and it certainly helps people. But I think with traditional astrology, what it does, yes, it is more black and white, but it has a slightly more realistic take on the individual. And I think that's where it is slightly more beneficial to clients, because let's face it, you only go to a doctor when you're ill. You don't go to a doctor when you're healthy. And the same, people don't come to an astrologer when their life's going great. They come when their relationship's broken up, they've lost their job, they don't know which way to turn. So they come to us in time of crises or
Right.
change.
Right. I do believe in so far as the relationship between modern astrology and traditional astrology is concerned, that they do have the two ends of the spectrum do both share relevance today because of all of the wonderful things that we said traditional astrology brings to us. But also, I think in modern astrology's uh, defense, they also have integrated a greater framework for how it is to be with a client and how it is to be in a counseling space with a client. And while it is true that astrologers aren't necessarily counselors, today a lot of people, while they do still come to know about their financial success, their real estate, whether they'll have kids or not. I just had someone who asked the horary, will I have kids? And there was some deep thing tied in with that. So while they do still have these very tangible, physical things that they want to know about, is this person my soulmate? And by far, the traditional method is a wonderful and a straight to the point way of assessing that through and through. There are also these existential questions that people come with that traditional astrology and traditional astrologers never really had to face. Like 2,000 years ago, people probably weren't asking Ptolemy, well, Ptolemy was not an astrologer, but they probably weren't asking the astrologers of the day, what is my dharma, or what is my purpose in life, or what a okay, go.
Finish. Sorry. Finish what you're saying.
No, I'm just saying that on a very real and practical level, the questions that we find a lot of people asking today. I had someone ask me the other day, how can I advance down my spiritual path, or what are some of the things that block me spiritually? And I truthfully wouldn't know how to assess that from from a classical perspective. Okay, tell me, teach me, school me, Sharon Knight.
This is the thing, part of spirit and part of fortune. The seven parts associated with the planets, and again, this is actually where traditional astrology is like modern astrology, because the parts have no body. They are midpoints, but they were really, really, really important. And the part of spirit, diamond, or religion was used to see your soul's purpose. If you, it sort of devolves back really to knowing the myth of which I just love that story. I just really, really love the myth of and it is about understanding your lot in life, that you cannot you see, one of the things with traditional astrology that you had to understand was, what was your heritage on this earth? What was your family background? Were you middle class? Were you slaves? Were you ruling class? Were you priestly class? That would have an effect on from your part of spirit, because the part of spirit is related to the sun, and you will see from that your divine calling, your spiritual purpose. And it again, I think the 7 parts. I mean, our Baruni said, oh God, they've made so many parts, it's got ridiculous. You know, there's only 97 parts you need to use. Well, excuse me, is that not like people using asteroids? I've had brilliant asteroid readings from Jessica Adams, another great astrologer. You know, and I will look at a chart where someone's putting all these asteroids, and I go, crikey, I can't read that. But
Right.
yeah, I can quite happily read these different parts. I mean, all right, parts of cucumber and parts of olives. You're not really going to see in someone's natal chart.
So
But you
are
can.
you telling me that my part of olive is not conjunct my ascendant? Because I love olives.
It's conjunct your Venus.
Absolutely. Uh, okay,
Yeah.
so I think you're bringing up a very important point, and in terms of speaking about the parts, because there, I hear you talking about the 7 parts of the 7 planets, but if we go back to our medieval literature, there are so many other parts, and Bonatti in his book on the parts, there are parts for each of the houses, and it's more than 7 to be certain. And the piece that I think is interesting that you said is that if we integrate all of these different factors, all of these different parts, then we end up creating the similar situation as a full asteroid reading with, you know, every single thing in the skies being in the chart. So I think what I'm really getting at is that we bring in things as they are necessary. It may not be necessary for you to bring in somebody's part of cucumbers unless that person is specifically a cucumber farmer, you know. Then yeah, sure, let me take a look at your parts of cucumbers, you know. It may
I
not.
met a Greek astrologer who grew cucumbers. He would need to know the part of cucumbers.
Precisely, and I did a horary for a lady the other day who wanted to know about, will my relationship with my daughter improve? And so sure, we can use the ruler of the 5th house to represent your daughter, but there's also parts of daughters that can add a deeper meaning and a deeper context and a more nuanced response to this question that you're asking. So, you know, I will be honest, I do tend to, if I see that in somebody's chart, they have had a really hard time with their father, and this one is fresh in my mind because this was a reading that I just did probably last week. Like they really had an awful time with their father. I will pull out Chiron because I want to see where this person's Chiron is and whether or not Chiron is doing anything in terms of their parental axes. And most definitely it was. Now, I don't have Chiron as one of my default chart factors within my traditional chart on Solar Fire, but I do think that these things that are probably even a bit speculative in astrology, they sometimes do end up adding a nuanced response. I'm not saying that the chart without it wasn't giving that answer already, but sometimes these additional factors do add a bit of confirmation. And
I undoubtedly. I and this comes back again to when you're in a client consultation. You can only do what the client wants you to do, and again, this is something I say to people who have just qualified. don't get carried away with showing your knowledge. Listen to what your client is asking and only answer that point. And this comes back to sort of just general astrology, really. Now, last year, the Brexit thing, and I said that mid-December there would be a turning point in the Brexit negotiations. Now, I actually knew it was the 12th of December because that was the exact day that Saturn had returned to the position it held in the Aries ingress. So in my mundane astrology, I work with the ingresses. But Mike Edwards, my very first bestest teacher, told me never give a specific date, because if you're a day either side out of 365 days, people will say, well, you got that wrong. He said, always give a generalization within a week. So I just said mid-December, but I knew it was going to be the 12th of December. And of course, we had the election here, which decisively put Boris in charge. And Boris's remit from the outset has been to get Brexit done, possibly with no negotiation. So it's very important that you actually just listen to what the client is asking and you answer that question, and you do not try and show off your knowledge, because you can come unstuck. And that's especially with people who are new to horary. Right. They start, oh, I can predict this, I can say this, I can say that. Just answer the question. And I see it, with when they're sending in their homework. You were just asked to answer the question.
Right. Another piece that I want to ask you about, Sharon, is the predictive methods that you use either in your natal work or in your mundane work. So I know you just mentioned using the Aries ingress as one of your primary predictive methods in mundane astrology. But what predictive methods do you think astrologers should be implementing, particularly in their natal work, that you feel very strongly about?
Okay, in natal predictive work, obviously you look at the Jupiter-Saturn transits. That's first and foremost for every astrologer. But I use the Fidaria, I use perfections, I use solar returns, and I use zodiacal releasing. Now, zodiacal releasing, I think, gives you the headings of the periods. Fidaria, again, gives you sort of, well, Mars is 7 years, but most of the other planets, they're over a decade. And that will give you a flavour of the decades as to what's gone on before, which leads to why they're coming to you today. And then perfections. Now, I've used perfections for many, many years, and they are fantastic because you don't need a computer. You just need to know the rising sign, and then you can work it out in your head. If you can do maths, I can't, so I have to use paper. Perfections are really easy, providing you have delineated each planet correctly. And I mean, I've been guilty of it, especially when you do charts for friends. You want to see the good. You don't want to see the difficulties that are in their chart. For instance, for years and years, I loved my Jupiter. It's in the 11th house, it's House of Joy, it's in Libra, it's in Triplicity, it's in the terms of Saturn. Well, Saturn is in Sagittarius, and so they've got mixed mutual reception.
Right.
And I'm blessed with some incredible friends. But I have been let down by some incredible friends because my Jupiter's retrograde. So although, and it's in opposition to Mercury and whole sign opposition to my Sun. So I do have friends of good standing, good station, and I have some, well, obviously, I mean, none of us have friends who are bad, do we? So it's a bit of an oxymoron, really.
Right.
But I do have lovely, lovely friends who are, in the main, very charitable and helpful. But sometimes their help to me goes awry. They think they're helping me, and it goes wrong. Well, for years I couldn't see that. I just thought, damn bad luck. How can that be with the Sun in the house of minor good fortune and Jupiter in the 11th?
Right.
So
Right.
it is being realistic, providing one is realistic and looks at each planet individually. You can make very good predictions. So that's one of the main things with people with profections. And then, of course, when you marry the profections up with the solar returns, and then if we've just discovered in this Abu Mychal on the revolutions. Now, something groundbreaking in here.
Wow.
When you are perfecting signs that are cardinal or more than 15 degrees mutable, you go backwards. And Stephen Burchfield and myself have done a lot of research on this, and we were going to publish a paper, but time is just but we've probably so far analysed over 20 charts and life events, and doing it that way, it doesn't show up, but doing it that way, events show up. And monthly solar returns, plus lunar returns, but monthly solar returns are really interesting as well.
Give me one moment. I have literally just been teaching this to my students because I teach based on the astrology of Abraham Ibn Ezra, and this is on nativities and continuous horoscopy by Ibn Ezra, and this is the Shlomo Selah edition. It costed me a fortune, but
that's why I haven't got it.
But the monthly solar returns is something that we should do an entire episode about, because people have no awareness that there is even such a thing as a monthly solar return. And my initial point of contact with this material was from my mentor Lee Lehman, who calls them the 12th harmonic solar return, because you're doing 12 of them for each of the months. And it was just the most brilliant thing in the world when she put it to work in a question that I had that had spanned an entire year, and to see how that question developed and changed shape with each and every passing month was brilliant. So monthly solar returns, please talk about it some more.
Well, I use them in mundane. They are used in mundane. I can't remember if it's in Banati as well. Not sure. But you see, I'd kill to have that Shlomo. I really would. Just trying to think, one of the Brill publications, I found it online cheap, on the revolutions, on the great conjunctions. I think in there he talks about monthly solar returns for mundane work, with the Aries ingress.
Right.
And again, that shows up so much. And again, it comes down to correct delineation of the individual chart. And this is again where we then enter the vexatious issue of which house system.
Oy vey. Sharon Knight, I was going to leave the topic alone. I was not even going to bring it up remotely, when you started to speak about perfections, I was going to completely skim over it. But now that you brought it up, we have to talk about it. House
Right.
systems.
House systems. Phew. Do I stick my head above the parapet?
Okay, so here's the question. And once again, I wasn't going to bring it up, but here's the question. In terms of the work that you do with perfections, are you using regiomontanas or are you using whole sign houses?
I feel that whole sign houses work. I have looked at charts using Placidus or Regio. Incidentally, see, I teach the QHP, we use Regio. On my course, I teach whole house signs, but I ask my students to also run their practice charts with Alcabitius and look at the two side by side. So I use three house systems. But for perfections, the whole essence of perfections is looking at the planet managing that year. Now, if you use any other system, you're going to get, oh, what's the word? It's gone out of my head. Not integrated houses, intercepted.
Intercepted, right? Intercepted.
You get
Right,
intercepted. So you could have one planet for 2 or 3 years, which doesn't really stack up. The one thing with perfections, which I love, because you can do such a good cycle for people, and this is something I've seen over many years of using perfections, is people have Saturn for 2 years, bracketed either side by Jupiter. So when you think about it, when you're in a Sagittarius perfected year, your Jupiter, Sagittarius is a gung-ho sign. It's get up and go. It's let's head for the hills. Let's have fun. Let's party. Let's think about our fellow grazers, but, seriously. And then you get to Capricorn, to Saturn, and it's, okay, you've had your hijinks, now work. And then when it gets to Aquarius, it's all right, okay, you've looked at the practicalities of life. Now use your intellect, become a little bit more aware of what's going to happen. So by the time you get to your next Jupiter perfection, Pisces, you're more in touch with what's going on around you. You're more connected. You're not so selfish as you were 3 years ago when you're in your Sagittarius perfection. So if you have a system that intercepts the signs, you may skip over the Sagittarius and the Capricorn. You're going to miss the fun and the graft, because that's what, you have to graft
right.
after you've had your fun to pay back. And then you may just get the Saturn and then miss the Pisces, and then straight away you're into Aries to a Mars. Yeah. So I do feel that if people work with perfections, that they should use whole sign houses. And whether or not they start it from 0 degrees or from 29 degrees, if that's where their ascendant is, then fine. But do use whole signs with perfections. I feel it give people more meat. And as I say, with this Abu Mychal and the revolutions, translated by Ben, when it shows you when you hit a cardinal, you go backwards. It kind of works. When you hit Capricorn, you're going into Sagittarius. So you've come from the graft to the nice times, the nice month. And of course, again, when you use the whole sign system, and you do your annual perfections, you've then got the 12 months of the year. And then the weeks, and then the days, and then the hours.
The hours.
Through the days. So I do feel, perfections have become a great go-to for modern astrologers. It's such a good system. I think again, a lot of people say solar returns don't work, but it's because they haven't actually delineated the ruling planet, and that's why you don't get results. It's the same with the lot of fortune. People don't understand it, partly because they don't understand the philosophy, but again because they haven't understood the connection with the moon, with the body. They say, oh, it's to do with money. Well, yeah, but it's to do with your body. The
Right.
sun is to do with your soul.
Right.
And your body is how you work.
Mm-hmm.
You use your body for whatever trade you're in or business you're in.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And in the Renaissance, they had the fashion of saying that the moon rules the vegetative soul, whereas Mercury rules the rational soul. So it was this distinction between these two parts of us, whereas the body as the vehicle that we move through was seen as being more of the temple of the vegetative spirits, which were ruled by the moon, which ties in with something that I recently heard Jon Frawley say, that the part of fortune, he calls it the part of hunger, because the body, being the vegetative soul, is where we fulfill our cravings. And so the part of fortune, therefore, becomes a place of fulfillment for us as we move throughout our lives.
yeah, yes, I do agree with John's definition of that. I don't. Does John change the formula, Diane, or not? See, again, this is something that is really, really important. That, to my knowledge, isn't taught by the modern astrology schools. Is diurnal nocturnal charts. There
Right.
is a huge, huge difference.
Right.
And when you're doing, when I say about correct delineation, to understand how the planets work, you need to understand the difference between diurnal and nocturnal charts,
Right.
and the different emphasis then on the planets, because the sun's planets, his bodyguards, Jupiter and Saturn, they're his commander-in-chief and his minister, his chief minister. They accompany him and they look after him. Whereas the moon, she's got rascally Mars protecting her, and she's got lovely Venus looking after her.
Right.
And then Mercury goes between the two halves and delivers messages. So when the respective planets, the courtiers, are with their king or queen, everyone's happy. But when when Saturn's been told, you've got to go and look after the queen, he doesn't want to. And Jupiter certainly doesn't really want to. He likes it. He likes the luxury. But seriously, he's got a trail behind the queen.
Right.
Although he's happy in her palace, obviously he's exalted in Cancer. He likes that because it's nice.
Right. When it comes to the parts of fortune and the parts of spirit, and this whole concept of diurnal and nocturnal, and moon plus ascendant minus sun, or sun plus ascendant minus moon, I don't think that people really understand that until they work it out for themselves with their hands, and they see, oh wow, this is where the parts of fortune would be if this were a diurnal chart, or this is where the part of spirit would be if this were a nocturnal chart. And I do feel as if there's something of the tangible relationship that we have to astrology, where we're not just looking up charts that we can generate using solar fire, but we're actually calculating these things and seeing, wow, when I add my degrees of my moon to the degrees of my ascendant and minus the degrees of my sun, this factor ends up here. It makes it alive again, I think. And then with that living basis, we can add on the philosophy, because it's something that we can actually feel tangibly in our own hands. So
yeah. Well, again, you see, I was very lucky because I'm so old. When I learned astrology in the 80s, we didn't have computers. We did not have astrological programs. Everything had to be calculated by hand. And it really has served me, and I should think for all those of my generation, because you can instantly look at a chart and know if things are in the right place. Whereas those who've only learned astrology and haven't had to learn how to draw up a chart by hand, they can work with a chart that is incorrect and not know it. It is tedious and it's hateful because I can't do maths. I mean, it was a real struggle for me to learn to draw up a chart, but because I was so passionate, it was the one mathematical factor I was able to focus on and crack.
Right.
Also, I think hand drawing a chart gives you a connection that certainly when you're learning astrology, hand drawing a chart, you're connected with the symbols. You're connected with the fact that this sun is in an earth sign, therefore it's grounded, it's practical, it's down to earth. It's not going to move quickly. It's going to be ponderous. It's going to be steady. It could be almost immovable. So those who've come to astrology and who learn astrology just from a computer-generated chart, perhaps when they've done it after a few years, they may then feel like drawing up a chart. But I think it's a pity in some respects that it is now so easy, just hit a button and up comes a chart and you've got no connection with it.
Right. I definitely believe that every astrologer should know how to calculate a chart by hand. And it has been my good fortune to have gone through the NCGR certification process up to level 3 with Mira Epstein mentoring me basically every single day.
Aren't you blessed?
I am. I definitely am. I've had some of the greatest astrological mentors that this boy could ever hope for. And Mira was definitely one of them because she taught me how to calculate a chart by hand. And it's something that I think every astrologer should know how to do because it does give you a relationship to your craft that just going on astro.com isn't going to bring you. It gives you a lived, in the trenches reality of not just what it takes to calculate a chart, but it also allows you to respect astrologers way back in the day who didn't even have the ability to dream about a computer being made. You know, like, can we imagine how many charts Lily had to do with his horary practice where people were seeing him day in and day out? And I mean, it's just really fascinating that we have so much technology today, but our technology in a way hasn't necessarily made us better at our craft. Our technology has kind of stifled some of the sharpness that would be developed if we still had to do these things manually.
Yes. Yeah, on the QHP course, we have everybody draw the charts up by hand. And then the QHP students who come on to my course, of course, I'm fully confident in their knowledge. But yeah, I love, I always had this vision in my head of Lily sort of sitting behind his window with a slate and some chalk. I mean, we know he kept notebooks. I've seen them. And he'd he'd get up in the morning and think, yeah, right, okay, moon's there, Mercury, could be there, Mars. And then he'd have a slate and then the church bell would go. First client of the day, quarter of an hour later, next client, yeah, well, okay, quarter of an hour, church clock's just rung the quarter of an hour, so I know the degrees of the ascendant have moved on. And he would just sort of use the same chart for the day for his hundreds of clients that he saw. And but he was a master of his craft. I mean, we know in Christian astrology there are some slight errors, but he was just a master, wasn't he?
Right. Sharon, you have shared so much with us today, from your amazing practice of traditional astrology, and I really think that it's important that people, one, listen to this podcast, but also
Yeah.
two, but also two, that people really begin to interact with these perspectives of traditional astrology in a richer and a fuller way. Because I think that there is, on one level, this sort of resistance from people because they feel as if, oh, it's just an artifact, or it's just a thing that you do if you have an academic relationship to astrology. But what you've kind of laid out today is that no, this content and this information that we get from traditional astrology, it impacts all of us, whether we are the trained scholar, or whether we are the astrologers to the king, or whether we are astrologers to the everyday person. The information and the techniques and the skillfulness and the philosophy that we get from our traditional approach, it impacts every one of us. And I'm so grateful to you for holding on to this gem from our tradition, and also for paving the way for other astrologers to do the same.
Well, you do flatter me. I haven't really paved the way for other astrologers. You know, I have my students, but here in the UK, as I've said to you, traditional astrology and me, well, perhaps it's just my personality, are looked on askance. You know, it's, oh, here she is, widow Sharon again, back in the astrology fold. Yeah, what I would love to see is that the two systems are integrated, that people are respectful of one another. I mean, it's very damaging when within this minute field of traditional astrology, and I'm including horary, that you have people, okay, they're young, they're trying to promote themselves, but they are talking down certain aspects and people. And I just really want everyone to be nice to one another, supportive of one another, and recognise, especially for the younger astrologers, that actually us grey-haired people can, we've got a little bit of experience. You know, we're not going to take your throne. We're too old. We've gone past that stage. So try and listen to us a little, respect us a little, and for both groups of young people in astrology, modern, traditional, please try and come together, and please try and recognize what a gift astrology is to mankind, that it can be used to help improve not just the individual life, but the global life. Learn to look at the mundane cycles. And again, I think this is perhaps something that is missing from modern astrology. Oh, well, you've got Andre Barbeau's books, and of course he's in the news because he predicted a pandemic for 2020. Well, actually, so did Ramsey in the December newsletter for the APAI. Again, you see, I'm in a position where I can't foist my traditional principles on the membership of the APAI. So although I edit the newsletter, I will put in some traditional perspective, but I can't expand. It's not fair on the modern astrologers. So, but I did put this little sentence in from Ramsey, and he said epidemic, pandemic or epidemic. It's there looking at the traditional methods. So again, although the modern books are beautifully produced, try and look back at some of the 17th century work. A lot of it now is in modern English, because a lot of people have said to me, oh, can't read Lily, you know, it's old-fashioned English. Well, I was lucky because I learnt at school, we had to do Chaucer in Old English. So when it came to learning Lily, it was a breeze. But for a lot of people, trying to learn Christian astrology from the Regulus edition is a road to nowhere. So get the American Classics Lily, which is in modern English, and everybody just try and integrate the past with the future and look forward, and just tell people what a joy astrology can bring to your life.
Sharon, it has been an absolute pleasure having you here today on the True Divination podcast. And I feel inspired having spoken to you. And I know that our listeners will also be inspired listening to this podcast. And for all of those of you listening out there, if you want to get in contact with Sharon Knight or find out more about the work that she's doing, you can go to her website at www.astrologersharon.co.uk, and it's likely if you type in Astrologer Sharon anywhere else, you're going to find her email, her Facebook, her Instagram, her everything, because everything is Astrologer Sharon, and I'm really really happy. So thank you from the bottom of my heart, Sharon.
Oh, it's been lovely to talk to you, Michael. You really are adorable, and I do envy you having Mira as one of your mentors.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I'm most definitely going to let her know.
Yeah. Well, happy astrology then, Michael, and happy yoga as well.
Thank you so much. And for all of our listeners, those of you who've been tuning in and who have watched the podcast as it's grown from the ground up, from the bottom of my heart, I just want to say thank you all so much for tuning in. I know that we're going through really interesting times right now. And the fact that amidst all of that, you all have chosen to share this space with us here on the True Divination podcast, it really warms my heart. So, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much. Have a wonderful everything. Be well, be safe, and see you soon. Bye.